Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Wolf Boy Cryptid Canine encountered in Maryville, Missouri. I was standing outside of my home smoking a cigarette in Maryville, Missouri at approximately 3 a.m. in August 2010. The streetlights cast a yellow glow over my neighborhood. The air was crisp from the recent rain. As I stood near the back door, I noticed something moved in the yard. Out of my periphery, I thought it was a dog. A really big dog. But when I looked at it straight on, I was scared. The dog was about as long as a horse. It loped across the lawn, and I got a good look at it. The dog thing was tan, its tail long and bushy with a white tip. Its eyes glowed green. It stopped next to a neighbor's fence, staring at me the entire time with those green, glowing eyes. It stared at me until I finished my cigarette and went inside. About 3 to 5 minutes, just long enough to smoke a cigarette. I was a little freaked out. The dog slunk off between two houses and I went inside. I took my father outside to look for tracks the next day, but we found nothing. However, when I stood where the dog stopped at the fence, my heart jumped. The dog would have stood at the middle of my chest. I'm 6'2". That wasn't the last time I saw the dog. Dad calls it Wolf Boy. We joke around about it being a werewolf. A few weeks later, I parked my car on the street behind the house after work at around 3 a.m. I sat inside the car smoking cigarettes when I saw eyes staring at me through the darkness. The streetlight back there flickers. I was sitting in the car smoking a cigarette. I saw those green eyes. When the streetlight flicked on, he saw the wolf boy. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because of the green glow. But it was the dog. It was lying down, just staring at me. Each time the streetlight flickered, the wolf boy inched closer. It was freaky as close as the dog was when the light flickered back on. I needed to go inside, so I just ran. TW.
Stalking Werewolf in 1980s Sarasota, Florida suburbs. Lawn. The other story I want to tell you was a series of incidents with my siblings and I. As I said, before, we had a house in Southwest Florida, back in the 1980s. For over a week our neighborhood had a series of what I believe were a stalking werewolf. It was June, I think, and around 9 p.m., I was out back on the patio. At that time no one had fences around their property because all of us knew the others' families around the area. The only exception was the family across the street from us. They had a 7-foot-tall cinder block wall behind their house. They had a large wooded piece of property and kept equipment out there. The dad was in construction and the wall enclosed 3 sides of the property. It was hot out and a slight breeze, no clouds and starry. As I sat there you could hear the dogs in the neighborhood begin to bark, then everything got quiet. A lone howl started, so I howled back. I do this rather well. I'd watch National Geographic and would mimic wolf cries. Anyway, this went on for about 5 minutes, each time the howl from the other end got closer. Down the road are train tracks that run north to south. The sound seemed to come from that direction. I started to get spooked as the howling stopped. Our yard had bushes and a tree on the side where the sound came from. The hair on my arms and neck started to stand up, so I felt like I should go in. As I stood I heard movement by the bushes. I glanced over and saw something move. I didn't wait to see what it was, so I booked it into the house, and I stood by the door which had glass panes in it. I watched as something very large and dark moved about the bushes. It moved away, and I could no longer see it from my vantage point. I went to the front porch to look out the windows hoping to get a look at whatever was there, but it never came out that way. So I went to bed and to read for a while to calm down. About less than an hour later my brother came home. He came to my room, and as white as paper. He was shaking all over, his eyes the size of saucers. I asked him if he was okay. Now my brother is the sort that has an explanation for anything unusual, and he's a big guy, so for him to be in this state was not normal. He said, "I need you to come with me right now. I'll explain when we get in the truck." I was still dressed, so I got up and went with him. When we got outside I asked what's going on. He told me there was something in the road by the tracks he needed to show me first. I was not happy about that as I just had my own experience with something from that way. As we got there it looked as if something had exploded all over the road. There was blood everywhere, as if something was mowed down in that spot, but there was no body parts anywhere. My brother related then what he had seen coming down the road. I was coming home, and as I got closer to the tracks, there was this huge thing lying in the road. I thought it must have been a Mastiff or Great Dane in the road, but as I pulled up to it, it didn't look like a dog I'd ever seen. It was hairy, its head and nose was twice the size of a dog, the body wasn't a dog, just dog-like, but much, much bigger. It was all over the place, there was an arm on the road. Not dog, a human arm. There was no trace of anything when we got there, and it was only minutes that it took us to get there. I said to get the hell out of there now, and we went back home. I told him what I experienced just before he got home. A couple of days later my sister came to me and said she has been seeing a large dog prowling around at night. It was huge, and she had seen it across the street as she sat on the porch. I told her what my brother and I saw, and not to be outside alone until we could find out what it was. We got together and decided to stake out the yard over the next night. Sure enough, it was back in the neighbor's yard. This thing was about the size of a Shetland pony, black in color. We had flashlights and turned them on and took off to the back wall behind the house. Their dog was going off like crazy. They had a small terrier. We watched this dog thing scale the wall. The neighbor came out to see what was going on, and we shouted there was something in his yard. He went back in and grabbed his pistol and went around back, but by that time it was gone.
Canine deer-like humanoid encountered near Gallipolis, Ohio. This story is from a few years ago, but my mother and I remember every single detail of what happened, but I would like some advice. I'm just not sure what we saw. So when I was about in middle school, my mom and I were driving home. It was winter and a full moon because I remember the snow glowing under the moon. It was only 6 p.m. but really dark. So we were going about 55 miles per hour when this thing crosses and stops in front of us. The only way I can describe it is that it was if you combined a deer, a dog, and a human. It stood about as tall as our windshield. It had the legs of what I can describe as a deer. Its back was hunched over and walking on all fours. It had the head of a dog, minus ears, but its eyes were white, and it didn't have a tail. The freakish thing about this creature was its skin. It wasn't a canine with mange or anything. It had actual human skin all the way down its legs, too long to be dog legs. It had a rotting meat odor, and some parts the flesh was broken open like if you would scrape your knee. It was pale white and you could see its veins. This thing was fast. It stood there and just ran across the road in the blink of an eye. My mom had to pull over to calm down, but we both saw it. This sighting was in southeastern Ohio, near Gallipolis. What did we see? Dogman, Wendigo, Crawler, GB.
Tall dog-headed man stalks witness in Cotteridge, Birmingham, UK. This incident occurred on a winter evening in 2009 in the Cotteridge area of Birmingham, UK. I was on my evening walk near my home. After walking about a quarter of the length, I glanced to my left and saw a very tall man walking parallel with me across the other side of the field. I estimate that the guy was about 7 to 8 foot tall, which made me look a little more carefully, whilst still walking. I noticed to my surprise the guy had what appeared to be the head of an Alsatian dog. At first I thought maybe it was a mask of some sort, but as I looked I could see the creature's breath coming from its snout. It was very cold, and there seemed to be a fluid movement as it walked, not the stiff neck you'd expect from a mask placed over a man's head. The creature was wearing a long dark coat and never looked in my direction. I panicked a little at this point and decided to speed up my pace. I glanced again to my left and was alarmed to see the dog-headed man had matched my pace, but stayed on a parallel course. I stayed calm and continued my brisk walk, observing the dog-headed man from the corner of my eye. If the thing changed its direction I would run, but I still hoped it was all a bad dream or a hoax. At the bottom, instead of crossing the brook that runs along the base of the field leading to the canal, I cut right up the small road. Just before I reached the road I broke into a sprint and looked fully at the dog-headed man to see what it would do. It kept pace with me but didn't appear to be running, again maintaining its parallel course. It stepped over the brook like you would a small puddle. At which time I had to turn my back, making the sprint to the main road. That was the worst part, imagining this thing was right at my back. PD.
Dogman, Bigfoot sightings and activity reported in Portage County, Ohio. Hello. I live in Northeast Ohio, and the area I'm going to tell you about is a country township. There's one blinking traffic light and lots of woods, farms and lakes. Every night I would take my granddaughter, who was 9 years old, for a ride down all the back roads to see if we could spot some deer. One night we were coming down a road with no houses, as it was with most of the roads around this area. We were coming up on a part of the road that had the back end of a Christmas tree farm on the right with deep woods and a creek on the left. We were driving slow, so we would see a deer, if there were any there, since it was a common place to see them. All of a sudden, from out of the trees on the left, a huge, and I mean this thing was a good 7 or 8 foot long wolf-like creature came loping across the road not 20 feet in front of us. I say loping, because it ran so awkwardly, like it didn't normally move on 4 legs. Like if you or I got on our hands and feet and tried to run. There was something so odd about its back legs. The best way I can describe it was almost like they had an extra boner joined to them. I was stopped and staring in disbelief at this point, and my granddaughter said, "Grammy, what is that?" Like I said, it was long black fur, thin but long-legged. Its chest was huge like a pit bull's, only much bigger. Its tongue was hanging to the side. I didn't notice any teeth, nor did I recall a tail. I was so intent on those back legs. It loped, but pretty fast, across the road and disappeared into the woods. I know it wasn't a coyote, and there were no wolves in this area. Now, I'm a country girl. The woods and the beasts in them have never given me any concern. But watching this thing move across the road gave me such a feeling of dread, it actually left me with a kind of sick feeling. I have to add that this area is a hotspot for Bigfoot sightings. They go back for decades. The house we lived in was surrounded by woods, and a railroad track ran through them behind it. About a mile back, there was an old Indian burial mound that only a handful of the old-timers knew about. Past this was a Bigfoot habitat or hunting area. I say that because they had built an enormous corral out of 20 and 30-foot trees all locked within each other and in a semicircle. It was marked with a huge X made of giant trees. The back of this area butted up against the very back edge of one of the lakes. There are at least 3 large lakes that all connect, and I believe that was how they traveled between areas. One winter, after a big snow, I had left work and went to my friend's to stay the night. At 6 a.m. my daughter, who was 16 years old, called and told me I needed to come home right now to see something. She wouldn't say why I had to get there fast. When I got home, she said our dogs, who were in a fenced-in area off of the back of the house, had started going crazy that night. She looked out her window on the 2nd floor, but didn't see anything in the way the pups were carrying on. She was too scared to go outside. Then she showed me the footprints. At the base of a huge catalpa tree was the first one, then another about 6 feet from that. They continued like that for a ways, and then it had turned and walked to the dog fence. Here the prints sort of shuffled back and forth, and then they continued through the yard and across the road into the woods, getting even further apart as it went. These prints had toes. They were not that long, maybe 8 inches, and they were narrow at the heel and slightly wider at the top. There were also very obvious claw prints. Bigfoot or Dogman, I don't know. But whatever it was, walked on 2 legs. One last thing. I took my granddaughter and grandson for a drive around the lake one night. We stopped because a deer went tearing across the road. It wasn't rut season, and I was wondering what scared it, when all of a sudden my granddaughter grabbed my arm and said, "Grammy, go, go, go." I looked at the spot where her eyes were focused, and there were 2 bright red spots about 10 feet up in the thick brush. I just looked at them wondering what they might be, and then they blinked. That was that. We got the hell out of there. This area is in Portage County, Ohio. Near Atwater, to be specific. If you check it out on Google, you'll see there has been a lot of activity there over the years.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.